All right, so welcome back to another episode of a continuation of Myth Busting March. We really wanted to take the time to answer this one specifically with Kat, as she's done quite a bit of research into this topic, and that is on allergy testing versus sensitivity testing versus intolerance testing. Something that we see come up a lot with new clients, and again within the community. Are people, not quite sure what's meant by the different tests that they're getting done, and how that impacts, their diet and their gut health and everything as well. So to start out, I think it would be best to just kind of explain what the difference is between an allergy, an insensitivity, or a sensitivity or intolerance. So those can kind of go together. And then I guess kind of in another realm, lactose intolerance specifically. Because I know there's some really vast differences between those. So I think that's a good place to start. And then we can go into the testing themselves as well.
Yeah, so I think it's really, really important to designate that an allergy is it's an immunoglobulin E response. It's an immune response, right? So you're ingesting something, you're having an immune reaction to it. It can be quite a dangerous reaction. It can range from anything from hives up to and through anaphylaxis, right? So it is a legitimate medical concern, and it's not going to kind of come and go. It's going to get stronger with repeated exposures. So if you have a true food allergy, that is something that you need to be working with your healthcare provider to manage. You're probably going to have something like an EpiPen, and you are going to need to completely avoid that food, right? That is completely different from a food sensitivity or an intolerance. And really all of the sensitivity or an intolerance is the body's not digesting or processing a certain food appropriately, right? And maybe you're getting some increased gas production and experiencing some negative symptoms. That could be bloating, that could be, potentially some skin issues, potentially constipation, diarrhea, any, brain fog can be associated with that. So some of those kind of negative symptoms, it is not an allergy. It is not an immune response. And it is uncomfortable, annoying, sometimes severely so, but it is not life-threatening like an allergy is. Right? So completely different.
You mentioned with allergies that, it's constant, right? You have an allergy, it's going to stick with you for the most part. Now with the sensitivity or intolerance, is that something that every time you eat this specific food or ingest, the specific food group, you're going to have that symptom, or can it sometimes be like a coming and going type situation?
It can definitely be a coming and going thing. It might be more related to load or volume than the particular food itself. It may be related to a product associated with the food. So say like a chemical that it's grown in or used in the storage and preparation of that food, as opposed to the actual food itself. An example of this would be kind of if we look at athletes from Europe, right, who consume, and you hear about this anecdotally, they consume wheat and gluten and pasta and bread and beef and all of these things over the course of their lives, move stateside, and all of a sudden they don't tolerate those foods anymore. They haven't just developed a sensitivity overnight, but they're probably sensitive to something else associated with that food, right? So definitely we can see it with the amount of food that you're eating, or something like the growing conditions or a chemical that we're using alongside of them. So determining what you're actually sensitive to can be a lot easier said than done. Yeah. Right? And then lactose intolerance, which an intolerance is a type of sensitivity. I do kind of separate that one out because it is a little bit different. So there's not a genetic component, but lactose intolerance is genetically driven. So what is the normal kind of progression for a human being is that we have lots of lactase at birth and we're able to digest milk very, very well. And then as we grow older, that the amount of lactase that we produce decreases. That's normal. Some people have a genetic variant where it allows for lactase persistence, and so they continue to make high levels of lactase throughout their adult years, and they still continue to have no problem digesting lactose, easy peasy. That is not normal, but it's fantastic if we have it. What we generally see for the kind of bulk of the population who has that lactase deficiency as we age is that they're still generally able to tolerate about 12 grams of lactose a day, particularly if we divide up that dose. As a reference point, a glass of milk is about 12 grams of lactose. A serving of Greek yogurt probably has about 4 in it, right? So that's why you see people who are like, oh, I can eat yogurt, but like I couldn't drink a glass of milk, right? It's just, especially all at once, it's just too much, puts me over the top. And so with most people can tolerate little bits of it in chunks here and there. And as we grow older, if we continue to consume lactose, we'll actually upregulate the amount of lactase that we produce. And so we deal with it a little bit better. So if you kind of, I think what happens often in kind of maybe the late teen years is we see lactose intake drop off markedly. And then in kind of the early 20s, and this is culturally, I think, so maybe very different in different parts of the world. But then, if you try to start consuming high levels of lactose again, well, your lactase production has dropped off and you don't deal with it as effectively. So if lactose is something that you do enjoy eating from time to time, my recommendation to my clients is to continue to eat a little bit of it, right? And you're probably going to be just fine with that. You may not be okay if you sit down and drink a jug of milk and have some ice cream and some yogurt all at once, but you should be able to enjoy little bits of it. Some people, absolutely not. Like they are just not going to be able to tolerate any at all. They have little to no lactase whatsoever. And so that would be a true intolerance there. So there's kind of levels to it. But I would say a lactose intolerance or sensitivity is different from just a straight up food sensitivity, which is completely different from an allergy.
Right. All right. So getting into testing, I think the biggest question out there is like, should I get tested? And I think within that, a lot of people aren't aware of the different types of testing that exist. So you want to walk us through kind of what the two main different types of sensitivity or allergy testing that is out there, and if you have any thoughts on the matter.
Yes. So I think that the education on this is abysmal, particularly from a lot of providers who are offering this testing. So allergy testing, again, we said this is an immune response. It's an immunoglobulin E response. And that is something that's going to be done by a medical practitioner. And it is a very cut and dried yes or no test. You either have an immune response or you do not, right? And so that's something where I know, like when my daughter was very young, we had some questions about allergies with her just based on some symptoms she was having. We went in, they tested for, I want to say maybe like 12 most common allergens. And it was a skin prick test, and she came back negative to all of those. So they're like, no, you're good. It's very clear. Now, if we had taken her and got sensitivity testing for the same thing, which is an immunoglobulin G test, she probably would have come back positive to all of those things. So IgG tests are not offered by allergists or medical doctors. And in fact, every major association of allergists and immunologists has put out a statement position kind of condemning their use. I should actually pull this up and see what the exact language is around it. Elected to issue a formal statement supporting the opinions expressed by the American Academy of Asthma and Allergy Immunology, the European Academy. Both of these organizations warn against the inappropriate measurement of food-specific IgG to suggest the presence of potential or adverse reactions to food. So basically what they've said is there is no scientific evidence to support IgG testing, and it shouldn't be done, and it actually does create dangers because it can one way or the other tell you that you're positive or negative to test, which can create problems. So what the IgG tests do is with a kind of a single panel, they test for 100 different foods. And generally speaking, in my experience, when I see clients bring back the results of these, almost every client I've ever seen comes back positive to 50%, if not more, of those foods, indicating that they have a sensitivity to them, and they are recommended by the person who has administered that test that they should remove those from their diet.
For the test to say that they are intolerant or sensitive to these food groups, what exactly happens? Like what?
Yeah, so essentially what happens is they send this test in, and the presence of IgG is, the practitioners are saying, indicates that there's a sensitivity to that particular food. The presence of IgG is actually a normal immune response that occurs. And what it's associated with is exposure to those foods and even tolerance of those foods. So if you've eaten those foods, you're probably going to test positive because antibodies are in your system, right? So if you've eaten eggs and you've eaten almonds, those are probably like two of the biggest ones. You're going to probably test positive to them, right? Things that people don't test positive so often to, maybe like Brazil nuts, something that they haven't eaten as commonly, right? And so the people come back, they have this huge list of sensitivities. They're advised to pull those from their diet. And now what we've done is we've really created some restricted eating habits, decrease your vitamin mineral intake, made your life a whole lot harder for no reason, because there's definitely not an allergy there, right? And there may not be a sensitivity there. So I tend to disregard those tests, and then I will work with my clients and say, okay, like let's go on a symptom by symptom basis for each of these foods, right?
Are there any potential issues to reintroducing a food if somebody has taken it out based on a sensitivity test for X amount of time, and then, say, for example, have cut out eggs because they thought they were intolerant to them, and bringing them back in? Are there any risks associated with that?
There shouldn't be any risks associated with that. I mean, the one thing, and this is kind of the allergy and immunologist stance, is that unfortunately, because an IgG test is not going to pick up an allergy, technically what could happen is you could have an allergy to something, you've removed it, you put it back in, and now you get an allergic reaction. I think the chances of that are extremely low, especially if you're talking about an adult who's been, if you've been eating that food over an extended period of time, mm-hmm. and you removed it and reintroduced it, you're not probably going to pop up with an allergy, right? But you could be sensitive. Absolutely. If you've removed eggs for a while and you've reintroduced them, and then you're finding that you're having negative symptoms associated with that, absolutely you could be sensitive, right? And that is a case where I would make an argument for, okay, like let's decrease our intake of this, or let's remove it for another period of time and try it again down the road and see where we go. But I think that going on a symptom-led basis, as opposed to just removing 50 of your most commonly eaten foods because a piece of paper tells you to, is a much better way to go in terms of keeping your diet open and varied.
And is actual allergy testing a solution for food sensitivities? Like, could an allergic reaction be something related to your digestion, like bloat, cramping, irregular bowel movements, all of that? Could that ever be associated with allergies?
I mean, I'd probably want to defer to an immunologist, but I would say that no, an allergy is generally quite severe. And as we said, it kind of increases with exposure. So to have kind of those low level sensitivity symptoms based off a true allergy, I would think is not going to be the case. But I probably would defer that, because there may be cases. And if you're really that concerned about it, then absolutely go see an allergist and kind of get that evaluated by them. But no, sensitivity is very, very different. So I would think that you're kind of just working with, okay, what am I actually sensitive to? Removing or decreasing load. And that's probably another thing that we want to talk about, right? Is because what we often see, this is getting a little bit away from kind of sensitivity testing into, like, say, an elimination diet, which is actually a really good and useful way to kind of determine what sensitivities might be. An elimination diet, though, is not meant to be a long-term diet, right? It's kind of a test retest. It's allowing yourself to peel back a bunch of foods, allow your gut to settle out a little bit, and reintroduce those foods to see if you have a bit of a reaction. Essentially what happens is we can get some inflammation and or bacterial overgrowth happening in the gut. If we give that time to settle out a little bit, we should be able to see a little bit more clearly what the effects of things are. Anyone who advises you to stay on an elimination diet long term, I would be moving very far away from and getting another opinion or getting another helping hand with that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, I think that covers everything and probably lets us know that there's another chat coming up soon on the topic of elimination diets, specifically FODMAP. I think that's one that's thrown around quite frequently, as well as anti-inflammatory and all of that as well. So we'll definitely have another podcast chat in the mix coming up soon. But if you do have any questions about allergy testing, sensitivity testing, the differences between the two, please don't hesitate to reach out. This is something we're pretty passionate about and want the knowledge to be spread. So yeah, looking forward to hearing anybody's feedback or insights, personal experiences, all that good stuff.
Yeah. And if you've got a list of 60 foods that you can't eat because of a sensitivity, I'd say maybe think about revisiting that with or without some assistance and just exploring that a little bit and seeing what you can do with it, because that's a lot of food.
Yeah. And trust yourself too. Trust your own gut when it comes to what feels good and what doesn't. I think that's sometimes
literally
trust your gut. All right. Well, thanks again, Kat, for bringing in all of your knowledge, and we'll look forward to the next one.
All right. Sounds good.